Good morning. So I have been I'm a researcher at Inria, and I have been in Lyon for the last 4 years, where I have a group working on data and intermediation. And I got interested into that topic while I was living in China, where I was before I moved to Lyon for a very long time, and where the development of these tools was very impressive. So I don't really know much about the concept of ownership, but so I'll speak more about who controls the data than who owns the data, because I have little understanding of the legal aspects of ownership. But before I start, let me say a few words about the MakerCon event where I spent the last 2 days, which is in San Francisco right now, and where I was very impressed by the capacity that people, individuals, or small groups of people now have to design devices. And so devices mean hardware and software together, and which is greatly permitted now by 3D printing. And what is interesting is that while people were talking about 3D printers a few years ago, now nobody speaks about 3D printers anymore, but they speak about the devices they're able to make. 3D printers becoming something that is just usual. And the landscape changes a lot because there are more printing capacity that allows you to print in different materials. So you're not only able to prototype, but you're also able to print directly the devices you need, which change many things. You can personalize the device you're building, and this is widely, or this will be widely used for healthcare purposes. It allows also robots, for instance, to when they have a piece which is broken, to print that piece and change it. And that makes a lot of sense if you think of a robot that goes to Mars, for instance. Then there is no need to have all the pieces sent there, but just giving the capacity to build those pieces. So what is interesting is that suddenly there is a large capacity for people to make those devices, develop those devices that were impossible, that really belong to the past to big enterprises that had the capacity to do it. And I found a very interesting similarity with the data. In fact, the data we have would be like the 3D printer for makers. Data allows people to develop new apps, new services, and change the world. Now, I believe there is governments do believe that data will allow new services, new applications, and there is a whole movement of public authorities and governments to make this data available. I think one of the leaders in Europe is the UK, that 2 years ago during the G8 meeting in June 2013 proposed to the 8 countries to sign a charter for open data, which is a very ambitious charter in the sense that it proposes open data by default. That is, all the governmental data should be published unless there are good reasons not to do so. And there are essentially 3 reasons not to do so. One is national security, one is privacy protection, and the other one has to do with IPR, so other means to publish the data. More or less at the same time, the European Union published a directive for public sector information that will essentially force European governments, when this directive is translated into their national laws, to publish their government data. So there is really this large confidence in the public administration that public data should be open, and the reasons, many reasons about efficiency and more democratic and accountable behavior have been mentioned before. So in France, for instance, since last year, we have a chief data officer at the state level who's coordinating the efforts of the country. Now, I think we need to go back to, it's hard to get a vision of what will be done with this public data, and there are many apps that have been developed for public services, mostly in cities and mostly related to transportation, but I guess much more will be done with that. And if we want to understand what could be done with that, then maybe it is interesting to go back to, let's say, the late 90s or the mid-90s, when suddenly there was a lot of data available, the web pages, information published on the web, and something could be done with this data. And I think, I mean, I'm still very impressed by the search engine technology. So before the search engine, it was difficult to do profound things with this available data, but then the search engine came in and transformed everything. And essentially what the search engine does is it takes data which is outside, that the company that has the search engine hasn't developed. It analyzes this data, and then it offers a service, which is the ranking of the information. And then, while the service is successful, it analyzes the secondary data, so the traces of users, and from the traces of users, it proposes new services, and in particular the services that are related to its business model, which is the advertisement, but also personalized services, and also global services extracting information or knowledge from the huge amount of data that it has from the behavior of its users. Now, I think this schema is completely general. This industry works on data which they haven't developed. Some of them is public, web pages, open government data. Some of them is not open, like the data that social networks rely on, for instance, but it is not data they produce, it's data they host. And then they offer services that are using the data that is based on the traces, so data they own somehow, or at least they control. So all these actors are actually intermediaries. They intermediate between people and services, and they are essentially the only one to be able to intermediate between people and services the way they do it. So intermediation is not a new topic. It's been widely developed with banking. Banks are intermediary between people and their savings and people borrowing money to invest. And what is interesting in the intermediaries is that they have a knowledge that people don't have. So you cannot invest without, essentially, you cannot invest your savings in a company because you don't have the knowledge. So you put it in the bank, and the bank has the knowledge to invest it. But then the bank is also able to derive services that you wouldn't be able to derive, and one of them is mutualization of the risk that they are able to do because they have such quantities of information and money. So intermediaries always derive new services from their activities that didn't exist before. So Google Flu would be an example of that, but there are thousands of examples. So what is interesting is that most of these companies, they propose a service, but the real, not only valuable in terms of added value, but also of services will be derived then from the data they collect and they control. Intermediation is really one of the very important business now. It's based on two very basic principles. The first one is that you should have a direct link to your users or customers and avoid being disintermediated by someone else, which is what Google or Facebook or Uber or all those companies do. And so they serve their users very well, and they disintermediate other people, which is disrupting many industries. And then they have essentially an open system where other people will develop services on their APIs, using their APIs. So essentially, most of the services they offer are not services they have developed internally, but which have been developed externally. And there are orders of magnitude difference between the services, their own services, which are very basic in supporting the services of the others. Nevertheless, they concentrate a lot of data from all the services they support. One thing which is very characteristic of this industry is the concentration. The winner-takes-all effect is very spectacular. So you see companies having essentially all the business on Earth, or on a large part of the Earth, and the other disappearing. And everything you look at will have the shape on this sector will have parallel shapes. So a very big, one very big leader, and then it goes down very rapidly. Also, what is interesting is that this is really very important economic activities, and we just give one example of that, which is that, in fact, currently the top capitalizations, which were in the past mostly in the oil industry and car and pharmaceutical and bank industry, now see more and more leaders of intermediation getting up, so that you have Apple and Google at the top or close to the top positions, depending. So what is changing with that? I think the one who controls the data has power. So I would be more interested in the fact that if you have data, you have power, whether you own it or you don't own it, but if you control it. And what is new with these industries is that they are actually moving the control of data in the societies. So this move goes in two directions, downwards and upwards. Downwards to us, to the users, where we access, we have data available, and if you use Uber, you have much more visibility than if you, in the past, you were using a cab company. And upwards to the platform itself. So the power goes down, and it goes up, and what's in the middle collapses, essentially. So taxi company collapse. Publishers collapse as well, and many industrial sectors will collapse the same way. Now, what is interesting, let me go back to public open data. What is public open data good for? And I believe that public open data combined with private data will be a tremendous force. So companies putting together public open data with private personal data will offer services that will be very powerful in essentially all sectors. But they will offer services that will step by step replace public services. That will be true in the medical sector, for instance, but in many other sectors, and I would think of taxation, tax offices and tax services. Obviously will be touched by this. So it raises questions between public and private interest. So there are already tensions, but there will be more and more tensions, and there will be tensions on very fundamental societal issues between states and corporations in the intermediation sector. Now there is one point that maybe in the US people have not so much concern with, which is that there are other asymmetries that are emerging from this shift of power due to the shift of control of data, which are international asymmetries. There is a vision of these systems as systems bringing freedom of speech and democracy and so on. There is a political movement associated to that. But there are essentially regions that do not have systems. And one of them is Europe. Essentially, there are no intermediation systems in Europe. So if you look at the exchanges between Europe and the US, if you look at, for instance, the GDP of Europe and the US is about very similar. If you look at trade between Europe and the US, it's the same. It's not balanced, but it's the same order of magnitude. But if you look at data flows only in one direction from Europe to the US. Now, if you look at the amount of data that stays in Europe, it's almost negligible. So essentially, all European data goes to the US. Now, if you look at the US, the data produced by users in the US stay in the US, and there is a large movement of harvesting data all around the world, which is not challenged by Europe. So this will obviously raise political tensions between the US and Europe in particular, raises political tensions with other questions, but the issue of data, the control that you have, once you have the data, the control that you have over multiple economic services, but not only economic services, but step-by-step political services. Thank you.